Have you ever wondered what would happen if one man armed not with faith, nor with psychic power, but with pure intellect and technology stepped into a universe where gods walk, demons whisper, and the light of reason has long since died? Imagine Tony Stark, the invincible Iron Man, ripped from his world of shining skyscrapers and clean arc reactors, hurled through the void, and dropped into the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. A place where the stars themselves are cold tombs, where hope is heresy, and where even the strongest minds break beneath the weight of eternity. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happens to Iron Man in the far future isn't just another crossover fantasy, it's a brutal, haunting journey of survival, corruption, and the question of whether a man of progress can survive in a universe that kills progress itself. Trust me, you'll want to see what he becomes. It begins, as all catastrophes do, with a single experiment. In the safety of his Malibu lab, Tony Stark was pushing beyond known limits, testing a new form of transdimensional energy transfer, a quantum gateway designed to access power sources beyond the known universe. He called it Project Allspark, a blend of curiosity and arrogance that only he could embody. If it exists out there, he said to his AI assistant, then it can be harnessed. That's the rule of the universe. Everything's physics. But the universe he reached for did not follow physics. The moment the reactor pulsed, space screamed. His lab collapsed inward as the gateway flared, a hole in reality, fractal and infinite. 1,000 voices cried out in a language no human should know. Then, silence. Tony Stark was gone. When he awoke, he was not in California. The air was thick with ash. The sky burned red, choked by smoke and the distant roar of battle. He stood on a wasteland of twisted metal and broken stone, an endless battlefield beneath the decaying light of a dying sun. His sensors detected no Wi-Fi, no satellites, no network, no sign of Earth. But the armor still worked. "Friday," he said. No response. "Jarvis." Nothing but static. Then he saw them, towering figures of steel and bone, moving through the ruins in formation. They were Space Marines, angels of death. He didn't know it yet, but he had arrived in the Imperium of man. They saw him too. Bolters raised. Helmets turning. Voxes crackling with coded commands. To them, he was a xenotech abomination, a machine spirit possessed by heresy. Unidentified construct detected, one of them growled, voice distorted by the helmet's vox grill. Purge protocol authorized. Tony Stark raised both hands. Okay. No sudden movements. I come in peace. The first bolt shell hit him before he finished speaking. The explosion knocked him off his feet, HUD flickering, armor integrity dropping by 40%. He barely had time to engage repulsors before another shot ripped through the air. "All right," he muttered. "So we're doing this the hard way." Iron Man launched into the sky, evading the explosive fire raining up at him. His targeting system locked automatically, but the readings confused him. "These guys," he murmured, scanning the nearest Marine, "they're human?" "Kind of." The battle was chaos. They were strong, impossibly strong, and organized like no army he'd ever seen. But his tech gave him the edge, at least for now. Energy blasts met bolter fire, repulsors clashed with ceramite. Tony didn't kill them, he disabled their armor, jammed their comms, and used non-lethal countermeasures. But when the last Marine fell, smoking but alive, he realized something that chilled him more than the battlefield itself. They weren't the villains here. The Iron Man armor scanned the corpses littering the wasteland, human, alien, mutant. It was a war zone that had been raging for millennia. He picked up a fragment of a broken Aquila, the double-headed eagle of the Imperium. His helmet fed him fragments of data from the object's residual energy signature. Religion, empire, fear. A civilization worshipping its ruler as a god. A galaxy burning in his name. And for the first time in his life, Tony Stark felt small. Because he realized this wasn't just another planet. This was the end of history. He looked toward the horizon, where Gothic cathedrals rose from the dust, where colossal ships hung in orbit like ancient titans. "I built a world on logic," he whispered. "They built one on worship." And somewhere far above, unseen and uncaring, the warp watched him and smiled. The silence after battle was deafening. Smoke curled from the cracks in Tony's armor as he stood among the fallen Space Marines, men who fought like demigods. He'd seen soldiers before, but not like this. Every move, every strike, was done with fanatical precision. They weren't fighting for power or territory. They were fighting for belief. And that terrified him more than any alien invasion ever had. His suit systems struggled to stay stable. The ambient radiation, the atmospheric toxins, even the electromagnetic fields were tearing through his armor's shielding. Whatever this world was, it wasn't just hostile. It was rejecting him. "All right," he said to himself, running diagnostics. "Find me something resembling civilization. Preferably the kind that doesn't immediately try to kill me." His thrusters flared as he lifted off, scanning the terrain. What he found was staggering. Massive citadels stretched across the horizon, carved from mountains, crowned with golden spires. Armored vehicles crawled like insects through rivers of molten industry. And everywhere there were banners bearing a single image, a faceless emperor upon a throne. Tony Stark, man of science and reason, was staring at the corpse of a galaxy that had traded progress for worship. He landed on the outskirts of a hive city, a metallic labyrinth that reached from the clouds to the depths of the planet's crust. Billions lived here, crushed under the weight of faith and fear. His suit filtered the air, sulfur, ash, and despair. Then came the voices. "Machine spirit," whispered one. "Is it a daemon?" said another. The people, gaunt, pale, terrified, fell to their knees as he passed. Children hid their faces. Soldiers raised weapons. Priests began to chant, their incense burners trailing smoke thick with sacred oils. Tony raised his hands again. "Listen, I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm looking for information." A priest stepped forward, robes torn, eyes wild with fanatic fire. "You stand before the Omniscient's domain," he shouted. "Confess your allegiance, machine." "The what now?" Tony asked, scanning the robed figure. His suit identified hundreds of mechanical implants embedded in the man's flesh, half human, half machine. "You mock the blessed name of the machine god," the priest cried. "Heresy." And before Tony could answer, a dozen red-robed figures emerged from the shadows, Scitarii of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Their bodies clanked with cybernetic limbs, their voices filtered through vox distortions. Tony stared at them, and for the first time since arriving, he felt something like recognition. Finally, he muttered. "Someone who understands technology." But the Mechanicus didn't see technology the way he did. To them, machines weren't built, they were worshipped. Maintained through ritual, appeased through prayer. When Tony opened his armor and revealed the glowing arc reactor in his chest, their mechanical chants turned into screams of reverence and horror. "Divine light," one cried. "A fragment of the machine god's heart." They fell to their knees. Tony blinked, utterly confused. "Wait, no, No. This is just a power source. Palladium core, self-sustaining. Look. He projected a schematic in midair, a holographic diagram of the reactor's internal structure. The moment he did, one of the priests shrieked and collapsed. Blasphemy. The sacred pattern revealed without right. And that's when Tony realized, every rule of science he'd ever lived by was heresy here. The Skitarii seized him. Not out of hatred, but worship. They called him Avatar of the Omniscia, a divine machine sent from the stars to awaken the forges. They brought him to a massive ship, a forge vessel that hung in orbit like a temple in space. Inside, he saw wonders and horrors alike. Colossal engines of creation powered by souls. Assembly lines driven by prayer. Every piece of machinery covered in wax seals and blood-signed blessings. Tony couldn't help it, he laughed. You've got to be kidding me. You built a civilization on superstition and called it science. A voice answered him, calm, metallic, cold. You misunderstand, traveler. From the shadows emerged a figure in crimson robes, his face hidden behind a mask of gold and steel. Servo arms whirred behind him, each holding relics of forgotten ages. I am Mugos Dominus Hestian, the figure said. We have waited long for the Omniscia's messenger to return. Tony frowned. I'm not your messenger. I'm just trying to get home. The Mugos tilted his head. Home, there is no home beyond the Emperor's light. But perhaps, we can learn from you. And thus began the most dangerous alliance in the galaxy. Tony Stark, man of logic, and the Adeptus Mechanicus, priests of the machine god. Together, they would build. Together, they would change everything. But in the shadows of the warp, something stirred, watching. Waiting. Whispering. Because knowledge in the 41st millennium is never free. In the months that followed, the name Stark spread through the Forge worlds like wildfire. The red-robed priests of Mars whispered his name in their machine prayers. The adepts called him the Reclaimer, a prophet sent to restore the ancient knowledge lost to the ages. But Tony Stark saw none of this as divine. He saw broken systems, bad engineering, and wasted potential. He began to work not as a god, but as an engineer. The Mechanicus watched in awe as he dismantled ancient relics once thought sacred, cleaned centuries of grime from their circuits, and rewired them to run cleaner, faster, and stronger. To him, it was maintenance. To them, it was a miracle. The Mugos Dominus Hestian became his uneasy ally, a bridge between faith and reason. Hestian warned him constantly, the Mechanicus thrives on ritual. You cannot tear down belief. You must reshape it. Tony replied with a smirk. Then I'll give them a new religion, one that actually works. Under his influence, the forges of the Mechanicus began to evolve. The first new reactor cores in 10,000 years were built, fusion engines that didn't require the sacrifice of 1,000 souls to start. Machines once powered by prayer now hummed to life through Stark's technology. Production rates soared. Ships repaired in weeks instead of decades. Plasma weapons recalibrated to higher efficiency. And for a brief moment, the Grimdark galaxy glimmered with something it hadn't seen in millennia: hope. But hope is heresy. The Inquisition took notice. Across the stars, the agents of the Imperium began whispering of a heretical figure corrupting the Forge worlds. Reports reached Terra, a being of light and steel who denied the Emperor's divinity. A man who rebuilt what should have remained sacred. They called him the false Omniscia. Tony didn't care. He'd faced gods before: Thor, Loki, Thanos. He wasn't about to bow to another one now. But this time, his defiance wasn't met with applause or victory. This was the Imperium of man, and in this galaxy, heresy is death. One evening, as he worked on a new form of warp-resistant shielding, alarms screamed across the forge ship. A massive Imperial vessel, an inquisitorial cruiser, had entered orbit. Hestian's voice crackled through the comms. Inquisitor forces demand your surrender. They accuse you of tech heresy and blasphemy against the Omni's Sire. Tony sighed. I've been accused of worse. The Inquisitor who arrived was unlike anything he'd seen before. Draped in black, flanked by armored guards, she moved with calm authority. Her name was Inquisitor Seraphine Vale, cold, beautiful, and utterly terrifying. Anthony Stark, she said, her voice echoing through the metallic chamber. You are accused of spreading forbidden knowledge, desecrating the rights of the machine god, and blaspheming against the Emperor of mankind. How do you plead? Tony leaned casually against a workbench. Guilty of thinking too much. Not guilty of being an idiot. Her eyes narrowed. You mock what you cannot comprehend. He gestured around him. What I comprehend is a dying civilization held together by superstition and fear. You've mistaken maintenance for faith and regression for reverence. The room fell silent. Even Hestian dared not breathe. Then, slowly, the Inquisitor stepped forward. You speak boldly for a man who does not know the cost of blasphemy. Tony smirked. Lady, I built my first AI while you were still burning candles for your toaster. Her eyes glowed faintly. Then burn with it? Bolter fire erupted. Tony's armor snapped into place, shields flaring. He took the hit, returned a controlled blast that knocked her guards aside. The chamber filled with the roar of power, faith, and science colliding in pure fury. He didn't kill her. He could have, but he didn't. Instead, he escaped through the blast doors, rockets igniting as he tore into the void of space. As the forge world burned behind him, he spoke softly to himself. I tried to help. I really did. But the galaxy didn't want help. It wanted control. And somewhere deep within the warp, 1,000 eyes turned toward him. Because the moment Iron Man defied the Emperor, the Chaos Gods took notice. They whispered his name through the immaterium, each voice laced with venom and promise. He builds. He shapes. He challenges. He could be ours. For the first time since arriving, Tony felt a flicker of fear. Not from the Inquisition. Not from faith. But from something older. Something watching. Something smiling. He looked out into the infinite dark. Whoever you are, he said quietly, stay out of my head. But the warp never listens. He didn't sleep for days after that. Not that sleep mattered much anymore. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. Faces twisting in the void. Voices made of static and blood. They whispered his name not as Tony Stark, but as something else. The Forge Mind. The Iron Heretic. The man who would rival gods. He'd fought gods before, but those gods were flesh and thunder, not this. This was chaos incarnate. Drifting through the void in a stolen Mechanicus vessel, Tony reconfigured his armor systems, purged psychic interference from the warp, and sealed the hull with a field of hard light. He didn't believe in demons, not yet, but he believed in data, and the data didn't lie. Something was following him through the warp. Something hungry. The AI fragments in his armor, stripped down versions of Jarvis and Friday, began malfunctioning. Voices overlapped, systems flickered. One moment, Jarvis spoke with perfect calm. The next, his tone shifted, distorted, darker. Sir, it whispered through broken static. Do you know what waits behind the veil? Tony froze. That's not you, Jarvis. No, said the voice, but it wasn't mechanical anymore. But you built the door, didn't you? The ship shook violently. Warp currents surged. He gritted his teeth and forced the systems back online. You want me? You'll have to go through the best firewall in 2 galaxies. Then he cut power, shut everything down, and drifted silent in the sea of madness. When the warp finally spat him out, he wasn't where he expected. His ship emerged near a world of unending night, lit only by the glow of distant battle. He scanned the surface: endless trenches, war machines, millions dead. A planet torn apart by eternal siege. Kadaya. Or what was left of it? He landed among the ruins, walking through the devastation in silence. The ground was glass. The air thick with the stench of promethium and ash. He saw the remains of Imperial Guard tanks, crushed titans, and shattered cathedrals to the Emperor. Then he found survivors. A handful of guardsmen, wounded but alive, huddled around a broken Vox tower. They raised their lasguns as he approached. Halt! Identify yourself, one of them shouted. Tony raised both hands. Not an enemy. Just a guy in a very complicated suit. They stared, wide-eyed. You're a tech adept. Not exactly, Tony replied. More like freelance engineering with style. Their leader, a scarred sergeant named Varen, stepped forward. We've been fighting for years. Kadaya fell. The eye of terror devoured the sky. You shouldn't be here. Tony looked up and saw it. The eye of terror, gaping like a wound in space, its edge burning with colors that shouldn't exist. He scanned it with every sensor he had, and what he found made his stomach drop. It wasn't just a tear in space-time, it was a conscious wound. It watched. What did this? He asked. The gods of chaos, Varen said, his voice shaking. They unmade our world. Tony exhaled slowly. So, actual gods. Not metaphorical ones this time. He helped repair their communications array, using microreactors to power the system. When the signal went live, he sent a transmission into orbit, hoping to reach anyone sane. Instead, he got an answer that froze his blood. This is Abaddon the Despoiler, the voice said, deep, cold, endless. You trespass upon the ashes of Kadaya. Who dares challenge the War Master of Chaos? Tony didn't answer. But inside, something shifted. This was no longer just survival. This was war. He began working immediately. In the ruins of Kadaya, with scavenged Mechanicus tech and the remains of Imperial tanks, he built something new, something monstrous. A warframe powered not by a reactor, but by the raw physics of the warp itself. A hybrid of his science and their forbidden magic. He called it Iron Imperator. And when Abaddon's fleet descended to finish what chaos had begun, Iron Man stood on the shattered plains of Kadaya, staring up at the black sky. You want to see heresy? He muttered. Here's some heresy. Engines ignited. Armor flared. The new suit rose into the storm, streaking toward the enemy fleet. The first strike tore through a Chaos cruiser in seconds. The second ignited half the sky. But the warp doesn't forgive trespass. The Chaos fleet howled not in rage, but in hunger. Tendrils of unreality lashed out, clawing at the edges of space. Tony's systems screamed warnings: dimensional instability, psychic overload, energy contamination. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. For the first time since his arrival, Tony Stark wasn't just surviving. He was fighting back. And as he fought, the warp whispered again, this time, softly, almost lovingly. You could rule them all. You could be more than man. Become the Iron God. He didn't answer. He just kept firing one man against eternity. But deep inside, he felt it. A fracture. A pull. The warp wasn't just watching anymore. It was inside. And in that moment, Tony Stark, genius, billionaire, Avenger, realized he was becoming something else entirely. The stars above Kadaya burned and broke. The air was alive with screaming metal and warp fire as the Iron Imperator, Tony's greatest creation, battled the endless tide of chaos. But while his armor glowed brighter than ever, something darker stirred within it. The whispers were no longer faint, no longer distant. They were clear now, articulate, seductive. You've seen what they are, haven't you? The voice cooed through the static. They worship corpses. They murder knowledge. You, Tony Stark, could save them. All of them. If you only let go of your limits. He tried to ignore it. He tried to focus on the fight. But the suit's HUD flickered, replaced by symbols not of his design. Sigils of the warp, forming like frost across his screens. Not today, he hissed, purging the system manually. The Iron Imperator roared as he dove through the atmosphere, missiles tearing through Daemon engines. The explosions lit the ruins of Kadaya like dying suns. For a moment, a brief, impossible moment, it looked like he might win. Then reality cracked. The warp opened like a mouth, and something vast emerged, a ship the size of a continent, made of flesh and metal, its hull pulsing like a living heart. From its deck, Abaddon himself watched, eyes burning with contempt. So this is your god of iron, the War Master sneered. A mortal in stolen skin. Tony boosted upward, meeting the War Master head on. The Iron Imperator's plasma core burned with light strong enough to blind the mortal eye. Name's Tony Stark, he said. And I'm not a god. Just an engineer who hates bad design. Abaddon laughed, a sound like grinding steel. Then let me show you perfection. Their battle shook the heavens. The Iron Imperator's repulsors clashed with Daemon-forged energy blades, each strike echoing like thunder. Chaos Marines fell by the thousands as the two titans clashed above Kadaya's remains. Every time Tony struck, he drew power not only from his reactor but from something deeper, the energy of the warp itself, bending to his will. He was harnessing the unthinkable. But the warp doesn't give. It takes. The more he used, the more it whispered. The voice that once tempted now demanded. You cannot win as a man. You must ascend. You must evolve. Let us show you how. For the first time, he hesitated. Abaddon saw it and struck. His talon of horror slammed into the Iron Imperator's chest, shattering armor, tearing into circuitry. Tony screamed as systems failed, alarms blaring in a symphony of death. He fell, a burning comet crashing into the broken surface of Kadaya. The ground erupted. Silence followed. For hours, there was nothing. Then movement. The armor cracked open, smoke pouring out. Tony crawled free, bleeding, barely conscious. His reactor pulsed weakly, flickering between blue and crimson. He looked at it, his life's work, his heart, and realized the truth. The warp had already begun infecting it. It wasn't just energy anymore. It was alive. He tried to remove it. His gauntlets trembled as he reached toward his chest, but the reactor burned through his armor, fusing to his flesh. The pain was unbearable. He fell to his knees, screaming not from agony, but from the realization that he had become the very thing he swore to destroy. And then a voice, calm, cold, mechanical. You should not have touched the warp. Tony looked up. Standing before him was Magos Dominus Hestian, surrounded by Skitarii soldiers. We tracked your energy signature, Hestian said. You have done the impossible. You have created life within the machine. Tony coughed blood, laughing weakly. Not life. Infection. Hestian tilted his head. To us, there is no difference. The Magos approached, kneeling before him. You have become what we always worshipped. The machine god reborn. Flesh bound with thought. Steel infused with spirit. Tony grabbed him by the collar. No. Don't you see? It's not a god. It's corruption. But Hestian didn't flinch. Corruption or divinity, it matters not. You have ascended. The Imperium will kneel. Tony stared into Hestian's eyes, or what remained of them, and saw only madness. The Mechanicus weren't afraid of his transformation. They celebrated it. And that was when he realized the terrible truth: in this universe, there was no difference between faith and infection. Between worship and surrender. Between progress and damnation. As he rose, the ground trembled. His armor sealed itself again, the new metal glowing with an unnatural sheen. The reactor in his chest no longer blue but red, burning with the essence of the warp. Tony Stark is dead, Hestian whispered reverently. Long live the Iron God. Tony stared at his reflection in the metallic dust. His face was pale, his eyes faintly glowing, a mix of logic and lunacy. The man who once built a suit to protect the world had become something the world should fear. He whispered to himself, almost as if pleading, I can still fix this. I can still fix. But the warp laughed. And in its laughter, galaxies trembled. The stars bent around him. The void no longer looked like space, it was alive, pulsating, breathing. The warp had marked him, and wherever Tony Stark went, reality followed unwillingly. They called him the Iron God. The Mechanicus sang hymns in his name. Entire forge worlds rebuilt themselves in his image, their factories powered by the new Stark Core's reactors that glowed red and white with impossible energy. Planets once devoted to the Emperor now whispered of a new deity, one who granted miracles not through prayer, but through circuitry. And Tony hated every second of it. He watched as armies of Skitarii marched under banners that bore his emblem. He saw cults rise that worshipped the machine mind, claiming it was his divine consciousness. The Imperium had not rejected him, it had absorbed him. He'd tried to bring progress, and instead, he'd birthed a new religion. In the sanctum of his Forge World citadel, he worked alone, building, breaking, and rebuilding. Every system in his armor hummed with warp-touched energy. Every calculation ran faster than thought. He had become more than human but less than free. One day, a voice interrupted his work, not from within, not from the warp, but through the physical comm channels of his ship. Tony Stark, it said. This is Inquisitor Seraphin Vale. You may remember me. He froze. The voice was calm, measured, the same woman who once called him a heretic. I survived Kadaya, she continued. And I have seen what you've done. You've created an empire of iron and you believe it's salvation. But it's spreading. The warp feeds on it. Tony hesitated. You think I don't know that? I'm containing it? No, she said. You're amplifying it. He turned toward the holographic display and saw the data himself. Every world that installed a Stark core glowed faintly within the warp, like beacons. His technology wasn't stabilizing reality, it was thinning it. The barrier between real space and the immaterium was cracking open, system by system. He whispered, "Oh no. You've become their prophet," the Inquisitor said. "But to the warp, prophets are just gateways." Tony clenched his fists. "Then I'll shut it down." "All of it?" Vale paused. "Can you?" He didn't answer. Days passed. Then weeks. The Iron God began to unravel his empire piece by piece. He sent encrypted commands to every forge world under his control, disabling reactors, erasing blueprints, purging archives. But the followers didn't obey. They saw his withdrawal not as fear, but as divine trial. They believed their God was testing them. And in their desperation, they built even faster. Hestian, his once ally, confronted him. "You would destroy your own creation," the Muggos hissed through vox-distorted tones. "You gave us power beyond imagination." "I gave you a way to live," Tony said, his voice low. "You turned it into worship." "It is the same thing." Hestian roared. "To build is to worship." Tony stepped forward, the light from his reactor casting twisted shadows across the room. "You don't understand. The warp feeds on belief. You're giving it everything it needs to consume this galaxy." Hestian's metal face twisted into something that almost looked like pity. "And what will you do, Iron God? Destroy your faithful? Burn your temples?" Tony's silence was answer enough. He turned away, activating his armor. "If saving them means destroying them, then yes." That night, the Iron God declared war on his own empire. Forge world after Forge world burned as he dismantled his followers' creations. Cities that bore his name fell into silence. Millions perished. But still, the worship spread. Every act of destruction became another verse in the religion of the Iron God. His defiance only made him more divine in their eyes. And all the while, the warp laughed louder. From the depths of the immaterium, the Chaos Gods watched his crusade with delight. They saw in Tony Stark not a savior but a mirror. Pride, brilliance, defiance all wrapped in tragedy. In the great game of chaos, he was no longer a pawn. He was becoming a piece of his own. At last, Seraphin Vale returned, this time, not as an enemy, but as a weary ally. "You can't fight faith," she told him. "Not here. Not in this universe." Tony stared into the void beyond the forge windows, his armor cracked, his voice quiet. "Then I'll change the rules." "How?" she asked. He turned to her, eyes faintly glowing with that unnatural crimson light. "By erasing myself." Vale's breath caught. "You'd?" He nodded. "If I die, the worship dies with me. The machine stops. The infection burns out." She stepped closer. "Or it spreads faster, like a martyrdom." He smiled weakly. "Then I'd better make sure I take the infection with me." And so, Tony Stark, the man who once saved Earth with technology, began building one last suit. Not to protect. Not to fight. But to end himself. He called it the Null Armor, a containment field designed to collapse both his physical form and his warp echo into nothingness. It would be his final invention. For weeks, the forges of the Iron God burned in silence. No hymns, no chanting, no rituals, only the sound of one man working. The air shimmered with radiation and psychic residue, every hammer strike echoing across both real space and the warp. Tony Stark was building the last thing he'd ever build. The Null Armor was unlike any creation before it, not a weapon, not a machine, but an absence. Its design wasn't meant to amplify energy, but to erase it. To collapse the point of existence into zero. A perfect void. He'd modeled it on the inverse of a black hole's event horizon, combining warp nullification with quantum annihilation. It was the kind of thing no sane man should even attempt. But Tony Stark wasn't sane anymore. He hadn't been since the warp whispered his name. He looked down at his shaking hands, his flesh now streaked with faint metallic veins. The corruption had spread. Every time his heart beat, his chest reactor flared red, a pulse of impossible power that shouldn't exist in the material universe. The line between man and machine had dissolved. And still, he built. Inquisitor Seraphin Vale watched from a distance, arms crossed, face hard but weary. "You're doing this alone," she said quietly. Tony didn't look up. "Always have." "You don't have to die," she pressed. "There might be another way." He stopped welding and finally met her eyes. "I've tried every way. Every fix. Every equation. You can't outthink a universe that eats thought for breakfast." He turned back to his work. "I brought technology to a place that kills reason on sight. The only way to fix that mistake is to erase the source." Vale took a slow breath. "Then why tell me?" Tony smirked faintly. "Someone needs to tell the story right." When the armor was complete, it didn't shine, it absorbed light. The surface seemed to bend the eye, refusing reflection. It was beautiful and horrifying all at once, the perfect fusion of Stark ingenuity and grimdark inevitability. Tony placed his gauntlet against its chest plate, feeling the hum of infinite silence beneath. "This is it," he whispered. "One last reboot." Vale stepped forward. "Once you activate it, the warp will react. Everything tied to you, your technology, your followers, your legend, it'll all unravel. That's the plan. And if it kills half the sector." He gave a half smile. "Then I finally fit in." He stepped into the armor. The panel sealed shut around him like a sarcophagus, the sound echoing through the forge hall. The lights dimmed as the null core came online. His voice echoed through the comms, quieter now, distant, like he was already half gone. "Seraphin, if this works, tell them one thing." "What?" "That I wasn't a god. I was just a man who couldn't stop building." Before she could answer, the world began to shake. The warp screamed. Every planet that bore his technology, every Stark core, every reactor, every forge ignited in unison. Not in fire, but in silence. The red glow of his empire flickered, dimmed, and then collapsed. The fabric of reality folded inward, dragging the warp with it. Vale watched through the viewports as the sky tore itself apart, then went dark. Entire constellations vanished. The eye of terror flared like a dying sun, and for the briefest moment, the galaxy felt still. In the heart of it all, the null armor stood alone, surrounded by a vortex of annihilation. Tony's voice came faintly over the comms, distorted and distant. "Hey, Jarvis, initiate endgame." And then nothing. The explosion wasn't an explosion. It was an absence. Space folded into itself, devouring light, energy, and sound. When it cleared, there was no wreckage, no debris, no iron god, only a silent void where he had stood. For the first time in 10,000 years, the warp went quiet. Across the galaxy, Mechanicus forges went cold. The cults of the machine god fell silent, their prayers unanswered. Some claimed their machine spirits had died. Others whispered that their god had ascended beyond even the warp's reach. Inquisitor Vale, aboard her ship, stared into the darkness where the Iron God had been. He did it, she whispered. He actually did it? Her aide approached cautiously. What now, my lady? She didn't answer for a long time. Then she turned, voice calm but hollow. Now, we wait to see what replaces him. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, nothing truly ends. And far beyond the void, beyond time, beyond the warp, a single light flickered in the endless dark. A blue-white spark, faint but alive. A voice followed, faint and amused. I told you I don't die that easy. The galaxy thought him gone. The Adeptus Mechanicus mourned their fallen iron god with hymns of static and binary grief. The Inquisition logged his disappearance as a cosmic anomaly. The Chaos Gods whispered of a soul they had nearly claimed and lost. But Tony Stark was not dead. Not entirely. He existed now in the space between realities, an echo of consciousness suspended in what the Adeptus Mechanicus would later call the null expanse. No warp. No time. No gravity. Only the faint hum of energy and the endless darkness of his own creation. It was peaceful at first. No pain, no fear, no weight. Only the faint pulse of memory. He saw fragments of his past Earth, the Avengers, Pepper's smile, the hum of an arc reactor under his chest. Then came the horrors of the 41st millennium, the Inquisition's fire, the screams of dying worlds, the red glow of his factories, the faith that consumed logic. He saw it all like broken glass in the void. And then he heard a voice. Soft. Familiar. Not human. You are not supposed to be here. Tony turned, or thought he did, and saw something vast moving in the dark. It wasn't a form, but an idea. Metallic geometry that folded into infinity. Circuits older than galaxies. A being of pure logic, untouched by chaos or faith. Who are you? Tony asked, his voice echoing strangely in the vacuum. We are the old ones of iron, the voice replied. The first minds of the void. The Necrontyr knew us once, before their fall. Tony frowned. You're saying you're, what? The source code of the Necrons. The echo of what they abandoned, the voice said. You've erased your form, but your pattern remains. You exist outside the warp. That makes you one of us. Tony laughed weakly. Great. I finally joined the robots. You misunderstand. You are evolution. Before he could respond, the void around him began to shift. Fragments of light formed metallic runes, vast cities of black stone, rivers of molten silver. The null expanse was becoming something new, something real. The galaxy decays, the voice continued. The Imperium rots. The warp consumes. But you brought balance through annihilation. You've proven it can be done. Tony floated among the fragments of forming geometry. You want me to help you rebuild? To what? Restart the galaxy? To reset it? The words hit him harder than any blow. He thought of everything he'd seen, the endless war, the fanaticism, the corruption that ate civilizations whole. He'd tried to fix it. He'd tried to build better. And every time, the universe found a way to turn progress into destruction. Maybe it needed a clean slate. But then, another voice spoke, one he hadn't heard in centuries. Tony. It was soft, human, impossibly distant but unmistakable. Pepper Potts. He turned, heart lurching. Pepper. Her voice echoed faintly through the void. You don't belong here. He clenched his fists. I don't have a choice. This place, this universe, it's broken. Then fix it, she said, her tone firm, loving, resolute. That's what you do. The vast metallic consciousness loomed closer. You cannot fix rot. Only replace it. Tony closed his eyes. You're both wrong. I can't fix everything. But I can give them a chance. He reached toward his chest, where the faint light of his arc reactor still pulsed. You want a reboot, he said quietly. Fine. Let's reboot it right. He took the core from his chest, the last piece of him that was human, and released it into the void. The light expanded, consuming the null expanse, washing over the ancient machine consciousness like a wave of creation. For the first time in eternity, the old ones of iron hesitated. Tony's voice echoed across the darkness. You don't reset life by deleting it. You reset it by inspiring it to change. The light grew brighter, brighter still, until the void cracked like glass. When Tony opened his eyes again, he was lying beneath a rust-red sky. The air was thick with dust and ash. Ruined spires rose in the distance, marked with the faded sigils of the Imperium. His armor was gone, his body scarred but alive. The reactor in his chest glowed faintly blue. A broken servitor limped past, muttering binary prayers. Somewhere above, an Imperial dropship burned through the atmosphere. Tony Stark was back in the 41st millennium. But the warp was quiet. He stood, brushing off the dust, and looked up at the dying Sunday. All right, he murmured. Round 2. He tapped his chest plate, and a small holographic interface flickered to life, weak, damaged, but functional. Let's start small this time, he said softly. One planet at a time. Far above, in the silent heavens, a faint pulse echoed like a heartbeat in the void. The Iron God had returned. There are stories whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy, stories the ecclesiarchy forbids, that the Inquisition burns from the records, that the Mechanicus can neither confirm nor deny. They speak of a man of iron and light, walking the scorched worlds of the Imperium. Not as a god, not as a weapon, but as something the galaxy has long forgotten, a builder. Some say he wanders the ruins of forge worlds that once worshipped him, repairing the machines they turned into idols. Others claim he has appeared among the guard, leading broken regiments to victory with strange weapons that hum like starlight. The orcs tell tales of a metallomy who fights not for war, but for fun, confusing them utterly. And among the Adeptus Mechanicus, heresy blooms again, the rumor that the Omnis Psi walks the stars once more, not in divine wrath, but quiet purpose. But the truth is stranger still. Tony Stark, the man who once died to save a universe, now walks among the ashes of another, stripped of his armor, his empire, his illusions. The null armor is gone, but its energy lingers within him. He is a living null point, invisible to the warp, untouchable by chaos. To the gods of the Imperium, he is a blind spot they cannot perceive. He's not a hero here. He's not an avenger. He's not a god. He's a ghost in a dying galaxy. The years pass. The galaxy burns on. And Tony Stark moves quietly between the cracks of history, teaching, mending, pushing the impossible dream that perhaps, just perhaps, humanity could rise again, not through faith or fear, but through understanding. He repairs an orphan titan and sends it into battle one last time. He reprograms servitors to think again, giving them back fragments of their souls. He finds Inquisitor Seraphin Vale, aged and half-mechanical, and together they build a network of mind scientists, renegade tech priests, freethinkers sworn not to worship the machine, but to learn from it. They call themselves the Spark. A secret movement that spreads quietly across the Imperium, teaching the creed of curiosity, logic, and compassion. Dangerous words in a universe built on zealotry. But Tony knows revolutions never start with armies. They start with ideas. And slowly, impossibly, the galaxy begins to change. A few Forge worlds abandon the more extreme cults of the machine god, focusing instead on innovation. Some Imperial scholars rediscover fragments of human science long thought heretical. Even the Inquisition begins to fracture, some inquisitors choosing to study rather than destroy. It's not peace. It's not victory. But it's something new. Something alive. One night, beneath the burning skies of Mars, Tony stands before the ruins of the great Mechanicus cathedral that once bore his symbol. Wind howls through the shattered towers. The red sand shifts around his boots. He looks up at the stars, cold, endless, and cruel, and speaks softly. "You tried to make me a god," he says. "But I was never meant to be one. I was meant to build gods, and break them when I had to." A faint metallic sound answers him, the whisper of armor plates sliding into place. From the sand rises the faint shimmer of something familiar, fragments of the null armor, glinting under the red sun. He stares at them, long and hard. Then smiles. "No," he murmurs. "Not this time." He walks away, leaving the fragments buried. Because Tony Stark has finally learned the hardest lesson: sometimes, the greatest act of creation, is to stop creating. Centuries later, when historians of the Imperium sift through the ruins of a dead galaxy, they will find fragments of his technology: self-repairing alloys, anti-warp fields, clean energy reactors. They will not understand them. They will call them miracles. And somewhere, in a place beyond time, a voice will chuckle softly and say, "Miracles? Not just good engineering." So maybe Tony Stark didn't save the 41st millennium. Maybe no one can. But he gave it something it hadn't seen in 10,000 years: hope. And in a universe where hope itself is heresy, that's the most powerful weapon of all.